Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and welcome to the Insider Exclusive. Today we have a special on discrimination in the workplace at one of America's Fortune 500 companies. Stay tuned.
James Stevens worked for VONS more than 25 years, stocking shelves, helping people with their groceries. But he says a few years ago, the job he knew for most of his life turned into a nightmare.
I watched it for years before I decided to do something because so many other people complained and were transferred, terminated, or forced to quit.
Stevens says a female supervisor in another department was harassing him on a daily basis.
The woman that had harassed him had placed a feather duster between her legs and simulated sex. He was also the target of unwanted sexual remarks such as, "I heard you have a big load. I'd like to be between two men."
Stevens says he complained in 2001, and the next year he was transferred and eventually fired in 2004 for complaining. A Simi Valley jury agreed.
For a total award of $18,401,000.
Mixed reaction tonight from VONS shoppers.
It's worth him winning, but not $18 million. It almost seems like the lady that spilled the coffee on her lap and got all mad about it.
If he was sexually harassed, he deserves it.
A man can harass a woman, but have a woman harass a man? It doesn't sound right.
Stevens says it is hard for people to understand.
There's probably some very masculine men that are probably afraid to come forward. So hopefully maybe this would encourage them to take that step.
I am very pleased to present the two lawyers in this case, Nathan Goldberg, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Roxanne Davis, welcome to the show. That successfully won a case for James Stevens against VONS Company, and we're going to talk a little bit about that case. If anybody is not familiar with this case, if they ever saw the movie Disclosure with Michael Douglas and Demi Moore, it's kind of a similar case, isn't it?
Some aspects, yes.
Some aspects,
yes.
Where we have a superior in a company who's sexually harassing someone underneath them, correct?
Yeah, that's true. That's part of, that set the stage for the case.
Okay. Tell us really what happened in this case.
Well, it started out with a woman who worked at the store that Mr. Stevens worked at.
Which was VONS.
Which was VONS. That was actually engaging in conduct that almost anybody would find inappropriate.
Okay.
She would make comments to him that was sexually inappropriate. She would engage in conduct that was inappropriate. And after putting up with it for some period of time, Mr. Stevens complained about it. Then what happened subsequently was he was retaliated against.
By the company? By
the company. After they did what we considered to be a very half-hearted investigation that nonetheless concluded that all of these allegations were true, they transferred Mr. Stevens to a very demonstrably poor store in the district. And he complained again. This time he went to the government. And he complained again that they had done this to him, that he had been sexually harassed and they had been retaliated against. And what happened from that point on is that VONS, after they lied to the government, told the government that, you know, that it was his fault, that he had been the wrongdoer, etc., then they set him up and terminated him.
Yeah. So in other words, because they lied to the government closed their case
Correct.
of this investigation, correct?
And,
That's right.
And shortly thereafter, they basically set him up, tried to make it appear as though he had done something wrong in the store, absconded or helped somebody abscond with product, or
Right.
tried to abscond with product, and then they fired him after 25 years of exceptional service.
Now, that had major implications for him because being an employee for 25 years, being fired for something he didn't do, stealing, I think, water or whatever it was.
Right.
It kind of affected his pension plan, didn't it?
Well, it definitely affected his income.
Yes.
Whether it affected his pension plan, I'm not entirely sure, but it cut off his income. It cut
Yeah.
off his ability to support his family.
Okay, we are going to have James on here in a little bit, and he's going to tell his personal story. But these kinds of cases, sexual discrimination, especially a male who's complaining legitimately against his superior female boss, they're kind of hard to prove, aren't they? They're kind of hard to win. I mean, initially when you get a case like that, you got to look at it twice and say, you know, can I really make this case successful, don't you?
Absolutely. And the thing that was really compelling here was that Mr. Stevens was a man who had an impeccable record at this company for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
He had a family. He was married with 3 children. He was a devout Christian. And he really took his job seriously and took a lot of pride in his work. It was his identity.
Mm-hmm.
He started with that company, VONS, it was his first and only job, pretty much, through his adult life. And his children identified with it as well. So it was devastating to him when all of a sudden, out of the blue, after he finally got the guts to complain that this woman was making these very inappropriate comments and gestures to him, to others, in front of him, that he should be all of a sudden villainized and cast out, and not just fired, but actually set up for a theft, is what they were trying to accuse him of, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then kicked out on his butt with no income, no place to go, no recourse. And they didn't even tell him at that time that they fired him what he had done wrong.
Let me ask you this. When James first came to you and he told you this story, okay, in your mind you have to think, well, if I'm going to take this case, how am I going to win it? You are running up against a brick wall with VONS because they're not going to admit anything, right?
Sure.
So how do you get at the truth in this case when you only have one person stating what's being done? How do you substantiate that?
Well, luckily, Mr. Stevens had written some complaints, and he had been specific about witnesses. So he was also aware of some people that had witnessed some of the conduct. So we were able to talk to some of those people. And we were very fortunate to have one of those people be willing to come forward at the trial and testify.
At the risk of losing their job.
Well, at that point, she was no longer an employee of the company. But yes, it was difficult to find other witnesses. Also in this field, in this case, we learned through discovery that VONS said that they had done an investigation. So that was key for us to get that investigation. And when we got that investigation, we found out that about 4 or 5 other employees corroborated Mr. Stevens' complaints about this woman.
And they gave it to you.
And they still fired him. They still retaliated against him.
You know, if I was in VONS management and I did an investigation and this report existed, I mean, it would be pretty obvious to me that you'd want to get rid of it, rid of the case. And so my question to you is why? Because this case started, and when did you file the case? In 2006?
2005 or 2000.
Yeah.
And there was a verdict, a jury verdict for what, $18 million in favor of your client.
Correct.
Yes.
It would seem to me that VONS management would have wanted to settle this with the smoking gun. The smoking gun was a report as well as the person coming forward, right?
Well, you would think
You
they
would
would,
think.
but you know the problem is that VONS never recognized what they did to Mr. Stevens. In fact, one of the reasons I think the jury ultimately awarded a large punitive damage award.
Yes.
They never even said they were sorry. They never. No VONS
To this
executive
day.
to this day. No VONS executive ever got on the witness stand and said, you know what, Mr. Stevens, we're sorry for what happened to you. If they'd done that, they probably wouldn't have been penalized as much as they were.
Too bad there isn't ethics in corporate America, huh?
Yeah.
It seemed like for them to admit that they had done something wrong. I guess they thought somehow that the judgment would be worse, but...
Now, before we bring your client on, I just want to bring us up to date about, there was an $18 million verdict in November, wasn't it? October, November last year.
Correct.
And it's on appeal, correct?
The punitive damage portion is on appeal. The compensatory damages were paid by the company.
Oh, they were?
Yes.
Okay, so this appeal process, how long does this take?
It could take anywhere from another 6 months to a year.
And their position is it's excessive.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
How is it decided? Is it got to go to the Ninth Circuit, or have you had mediation, or what?
It's an appellate court
Yeah.
that will decide whether or not the judgment was correct, that
Yeah.
the jury's judgment should be sustained. VONS is arguing that that they shouldn't be penalized as much, or they shouldn't be penalized at all.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring on James Stevens, the client, and then we'll be bringing you back and to comment on this. I am very pleased now to have the client on the show, James Stevens. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Good to be here.
You've had a tough time over the last couple of years and been in more courts than you probably ever imagined you would be in, right?
That's absolutely true.
And I just had your lawyers on here talking about your case. $18 million, $16 million punitive award because VONS basically never said, I'm sorry or anything. And as they pointed out, there were many other cases and some people who came forward who verified and collaborated basically what you had said, correct?
Yes, and I was very grateful that they had the courage to come forward.
Yeah. Now, you were an employee at VONS for 26 years.
26 years, yes.
And tell us a little bit about how did it all start? There was a supervisor that came in, female. What happened exactly?
Yeah, initially, when she first came on the scene, we noticed that she was very blatant with innuendos and would make sexual comments that were inappropriate. And the company had a no-tolerance sexual...
that was a standard policy.
Standard policy. You didn't think it. You didn't suggest it. No touching. And we followed that strictly to the letter. And me more so because I came from a family where we respect women.
Yeah, what did you do at VONS, by the way?
I was in charge of accounting, basically. I was called an inventory control clerk. My job was to count the widgets and to be sure that we got proper credit and receive payment for those widgets.
So this new person comes in, supervisor.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What happens?
And she would make comments in my presence. She would make sexual comments about my wife. She would ask me, do I do certain things? It was very embarrassing for me to even comment, so I would not comment.
In front of other people?
In front of me and other employees as well.
Really?
Yes. And at some point, I would say it was not appropriate. And then I was always wondering, should I respond or should I not respond? So in most cases, I did not respond. But I let her know that I didn't appreciate it.
And then what happened?
And
she didn't stop.
She didn't stop and continued. So I said, well, maybe I'll mention it to management. Some of the other employees mentioned it to management, and I noticed that creatively they were either transferred or terminated after they complained about her advances.
So let me get this straight. VONS has got a strict policy against sexual harassment. But
Absolutely.
If a person complains, they're the one that gets penalized.
That seemed like it happened on many occasions, so I was concerned about me complaining, and that's why I didn't for so long.
Mm-hmm. And so you did get transferred, didn't you?
After I complained, I was transferred about 3 weeks later.
And transferred to a lesser job, right?
A lesser job, a less desirable location, and it was basically a demotion.
How did they tell you were transferred? What was the reason?
The reason they told me was that the other store needed help, and that was the reason they was transferring me. And if I would say anything to anyone else, for anything to the contrary, that I would be terminated or disciplined.
So in other words, they told you that if you complained about the same issue that you were complaining about before, that you would be terminated.
Absolutely.
You got transferred. You were not in association with this woman anymore, right?
No.
But you felt that you wanted to complain, and you rightfully should, to another agency, and you went to the government, right?
Yes, I filed a complaint with the Department of Employment and Labor.
Yeah.
And they conducted an investigation for about a year or so.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the year, they came back and said they couldn't corroborate any of the information.
Okay. In other words, VONS lied about whatever took place.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now, as it came out in the trial, one of the smoking guns was there was a report that VONS did, which did corroborate your complaints with other people, correct?
Yes, it was, and I didn't know about it until the trial that I found out about it. And it was basically giving each other a high five that they defeated me, that they was able to trick the government and tell the government that there was something, but we did find something and we'll correct it. Mm-hmm. But basically they said that they won.
Now, you were finally terminated, weren't you?
Yes.
But you were not terminated for complaining. You were terminated supposedly for what, theft?
They implied that I wasn't following company policy, which included theft.
Yeah. And that was a setup, basically.
It had to be because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And
did you go before a hearing? Are you part of a union, or?
I have a union, and I complained to the union about this, and the union looked into it, and they couldn't get any information. They couldn't get a response from VONS.
Right. So this took place over a period of 2 years.
Yes.
You're out of a job now. The only place I understand you ever worked in your life. And VONS has helped you, raise a family, put your kids through school, and the whole 9 yards. Now you're out of a job. You've been fired from a job that you felt that you shouldn't have been fired from.
Yes.
It must be pretty depressing at that point in time, right?
It's like your whole life. It's your identity that's tied into your employer. Yeah,
Yes.
it's like your family, your second family. And all of a sudden, one day you have it, the next day you don't.
What made you decide that you were going to go to a lawyer and try and pursue justice?
Well, I guess my wife made it very clear that we had no income, no insurance. My daughter had just been born.
Yes.
And she said, you have to do something. And so at that point, I decided to talk to an attorney. But it was after much depression. I mean, I didn't want to live anymore.
How many attorneys did you go to, by the way?
Gosh, I lost count around 30 or 35 attorneys.
In other words, they all told you, you ain't got a case.
That's what they told me. And
or some of them were willing to take your money.
yes, a few of them wanted a consultation fee.
Yeah.
But mostly they said, you don't have a chance.
Yeah. What made, because I think you went to Roxanne Davis first.
Yes.
What made the story different with her?
With Roxanne, I guess I appealed towards the human side of it. I said, look, I've lost everything, just standing up for what's right. And her website said that she helped people that have lost your family, basically, your employment family. And she sounded like she really cared. So at the first meeting, she decided to take the case.
Let's jump ahead to the actual trial. It was a 4-week trial?
Yes.
Okay, it's a pretty long trial.
Very long, yes.
A lot of witnesses.
We had over 150 witnesses, I believe.
And they were primarily from your side?
They were mostly our side, but our witnesses didn't have to show up because VONS witnesses showed up.
Yeah. And they were, what your witnesses were saying the truth?
They corroborated the truth. In fact, we emphasize always tell the truth, regardless.
Yeah, that must have been a big impact on the jury.
The jury identified with the truth.
Yeah.
They could see when they were telling the truth.
How long did the jury deliberate?
It was over about 5 days, 2 half days, and 3 full days.
And they came back with what decision?
They came back in favor of compensatory damages for me, as well as punitive damages.
And tell our audience what that was.
$18.4 million
total.
Yes.
You must. What was your thought right then and there?
Initially, I was happy that they believed me.
Yeah.
The amount didn't register until later when someone asked me that you're $1 million man now. And what's more important to me is that they believed me.
Yeah. Now, currently, this is on appeal, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, listen, you have gone through a major struggle, and we certainly appreciate you being on the show. And we are going to bring now the head juror of the case on the program so that we can talk with you and him, and let's see exactly what went on behind the scenes, okay?
Yeah, I'd like that.
I'm very pleased to have with us the lead juror, the head juror on James' case, Mike Leaf. Welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you.
I understand you're an attorney, too.
I am.
You are the senior deputy district attorney in Ventura, right?
I'm one of the senior deputy DAs in Ventura.
When we had the lawyers on the case, Nathan and Roxanne, they said they took a chance when they selected you on the jury, but they later found out it was a good chance because I understand you've written some books on civil rights, haven't you?
I've written several books about the law, and one of them, And the Walls Came Tumbling Down, is about famous civil rights trials.
Wow. So they really got somebody who, even though you prosecute a lot of criminal cases, at least has a heart, right?
Well, some people think so.
Yeah. It's kind of rare that we have the behind the scenes, what went on in the jury room. The last time I saw that was in 12 Angry Men, right? And the actual client who benefited by your wise decision. Can you tell our audience, when you initially got this case, what were your first impressions?
Well, I was surprised that they were going to let me sit on the jury. Typically, lawyers aren't often allowed to sit on juries, and because I've been practicing law for a few years now, I didn't think they'd let me stay. I was also surprised that they didn't ask me more questions because, quite honestly, if they had probed a little deeper, I think they would have found that I didn't think this was the right kind of case for me. I was not sympathetic to Mr. Stevens or his cause of action.
Good point.
I don't particularly find myself philosophically inclined in these kind of cases to rule for the plaintiff. But they did ask me if I could follow the law, and I said I could, and I promised that I would follow the rules and do my job as a juror.
Right.
I was able to do that.
What was the most convincing evidence that you were presented that made you finally decide that this not only should James Stevens win the case, but that VONS should be penalized?
Well, Mr. Stevens' testimony was compelling. He was a great witness for his own case. And the witnesses from VONS were not convincing. Their stories conflicted. They didn't seem to be honest. And there were a couple of facts that we saw during the trial that were very troubling and that led us to believe that the people from VONS were not being honest. They were trying to mislead us.
They were lying, in other words.
Yeah.
So when you come up with a punitive award of $16 million, how do you arrive at that number?
We took a look at what the actions were, and we thought they were outrageous. We went through the jury instructions very carefully, and the punitive damage instructions said that if we had decided that the actions of VONS were outrageous, that they shocked the conscience, that we should come up with a number that was designed to discourage this kind of misconduct by that defendant, as well as send a general message to the public as well, that this kind of conduct couldn't be tolerated.
Is that number also based on annual sales or anything like that? Does it have anything to do with the profitability of the company?
It is, and that's what was interesting, because the instructions say that the number shouldn't be so big that you destroy a business.
Yeah.
You need to send the message, you need to hurt them, but you shouldn't kill them.
Right.
And so we had our damages from the first phase of the trial, and we talked about it, and we said, well, the only evidence we heard was from Mr. Goldberg, who said that the annual sales for the corporation were something on the order of, I think, $500 million. So we said to ourselves, well, how much is enough money to get their attention, but not enough money that it's going to break the bank?
Right.
And VONS never undercut that number. They never put on any kind of evidence to say, well, no, wait a minute, Mr. Goldberg's overstating how much money we make. So we figured if it was $500 million, $16 million seemed like enough to make them realize that they needed to cut it out.
You being an attorney know that such a large award is going to be appealed. And did you convey that to the other jurors?
Some of the jurors talked a little bit about it, but that wasn't the issue before us.
Yeah.
And we just did our best to follow the law, to follow the jury instructions as closely as we could.
You still have friends, James, that work at VONS, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Have things changed at VONS?
Not that they've told me lately. In fact, the ones that testified in my case noticed that they've been retaliated against as well.
So now there's new cases on the books.
Potential cases, yes.
Well, that's rather interesting. What was, and I want to ask you one final question. What was most compelling about his testimony?
That a man who had worked so hard for this company for basically his entire life, from the time he was a teenager, could just be tossed aside like that, discarded, like day-old produce. It was shocking.
Right. One final question, and that is, you said initially that you were probably not the best person to hear a case like this because you don't have sympathies for something like this. Has this opened up your eyes to other possibilities where people come forward with what might appear to be frivolous lawsuits?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Seeing what Mr. Stevens went through and getting a glimpse into just how awful a corporate defendant can be in a case like this was shocking. It was just shocking, and it has opened my eyes to the possibility that this is a lot more common than I might have thought.
I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. You've added a great insight into this whole thing. And thank you, James.
Thank you.
I have been very impressed with Mike Leaf, the juror, as well as your client. And I want to thank you for having them on the show. The question comes to my mind, and a lot of people always ask is, well, you handle a lot of discrimination cases, don't you?
Yes.
Yes.
And when a case comes to you, how do you decide if it's a good case or not? Is basically the person who's making the complaint, is that what it's based on?
Well, the person is the case.
Yeah.
And you look at the person, you look at who they are. You look at, for example, Mrs. Stevens, 25, 26-year employee, never made a legal claim.
Yeah.
You look at the individual in the eye and you decide, is this somebody that I want to represent? Is this someone that I'm going to want to take in front of a jury? Do I feel that this person is deserving?
Right. It doesn't bother you, the fact that even though James Stevens is a very credible person, and as it turned out he was, that you're going to have a hard uphill battle trying to get information to corroborate anything that he might have said.
That's just part of the landscape. I've been representing plaintiffs for more than 30 years, and every case is a battle. Every case involves a lopsided situation because you're representing an individual against a corporation.
Yeah.
They have access to the information, and many times employees that work for a company are very reluctant to come forward and testify.
Because they'll be retaliated against.
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of people come to your firm, as well as your firm, with all kinds of cases. And you handle more than just sexual discrimination. What other kind of cases do you handle?
Disability discrimination, age, race, sex, national origin, religious discrimination, medical condition discrimination, harassment on those bases. And when somebody makes a complaint of discrimination or harassment, then they are often, unfortunately, retaliated against, and so we handle retaliation cases as well. Any matter that has to do with a problem, a concern at the workplace, other than workers' comp, that's a separate area of the law.
We hear a lot in the news about some lawyers filing ridiculous cases or lawyers winning huge awards, which some people think that is outrageous. And the lawyers should be, lassoed in. I remember the senator from Arizona who tried to get legislation passed. It was called one yacht per lawyer. Do you remember this legislation?
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, but anyway, there was, in other words, there is a reason why these awards are awarded like this, is because it sends a message, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And also I think it's very important to recognize that jurors are not fools.
Yeah.
And you can't fool people. You can't take people like Mr. Leaf, who's a deputy district attorney, and fool him or make him award an amount of money that makes no sense. They listen to the evidence, and they really try to be fair. That's the overwhelming sense that I have as a trial lawyer, is that jurors try to be fair, and they try to do the right thing.
Okay, great.
And what is your life worth? You know, when they're trying to compensate a man who lost a career, 26 years of his life, down the drain, and no way to support his family. What is that worth, to have everything that you've built in your life taken away from you under false pretenses because the company decides that they want to shut up someone who raises a complaint of sexual harassment or such a type of a complaint?
Well, I'm very glad there's lawyers like you guys out there that are fighting for the little people. That's important. And if you could hand out your phone numbers again, please, Nat.
Sure, 323-653-6530.
And get more information about your website?
AMG Law, A Apple, M Mary, G George, LAW.com.
And you, Roxanne?
It's 310-282-9490. And my website is laemploymentlawyer.com or davisgavsey.com.
Okay. Thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hi, thanks for watching our show. You can get more information at www.insiderexclusive.tv. I'm Steve Murphy. Thank you.